Syrian Arab Republic.
شكرا السيد الرئيس.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd like to begin my statement by referring to an exceptional and extremely important development, which is the presidential amnesty granted by the President of the Syrian Arab Republic under Legislative Decree number 7 of the 30th of April 2022. According to this decree, a general amnesty is granted for terrorist crimes committed by Syrians prior to the date of its issuance, except for those crimes that led to the death of a human being as stipulated in the Anti-Terrorism Act and the Syrian Penal Code. We emphasize here that this decree excludes foreign terrorist fighters, and their countries of origin remain responsible for repatriating them and their families from Syria. The issuance of this exceptional decree by its legal, social, and political nature comes within the framework of the measures that the Syrian state has been taking for years to improve the humanitarian situation in Syria, to consolidate national reconciliation, and to deepen the values of tolerance, provide appropriate conditions for the return of displaced persons and refugees to their homeland, reintegrate all Syrian citizens into their local communities, and restore security and stability in the Syrian Arab Republic. The Syrian Ministry of Justice and the competent legal and judicial authorities in Syria began immediately after this decree was issued. They began implementing its provisions throughout the country. They have released large batches of detainees. They cancelled all warrants for prosecution, search, arrest, and summons in absentia, as well as judicial decisions in absentia issued against any Syrian citizen inside or outside the country. This was done effective immediately and without the need to go back to any judicial, legal, or security authority. I recall here that since 2011 and until today, the President of the Syrian Arab Republic has granted 20 general amnesties, benefiting tens of thousands of Syrian citizens inside Syria and outside it. 28,864 detainees were released by the court in charge of terrorist crimes. Moreover, more than 272,000 Syrian citizens have also been involved in the processes of settlement and national reconciliation in the various Syrian governorates, which has enabled them to return to their normal lives. The government of the Syrian Arab Republic calls for an objective and balanced consideration of the steps it has taken. It urges some countries to abandon their wrong policies and to adopt a positive and constructive political approach through responsible engagement with the Syrian government that refrains from any political considerations that are not consistent with the interests, security, and well-being of the Syrians. Madam President, the efforts made by the Syrian government to achieve economic and social stability and to improve the living conditions of the Syrians clash with the persistence of some Western countries and their allies in their hostile practices and their continued violations of the principles of international law and the provisions of the UN Charter. This is manifest in the continued illegal foreign military presence of the Turkish and U.S. forces in Syrian territory, and their sponsorship of terrorist organizations and separatist militias, and the looting of national wealth, including oil, gas, and agricultural crops, not to mention the economic terrorism that comes from imposing unilateral coercive measures on the Syrian people. The recent decision by the U.S. administration to grant a license for economic activities in specific areas in the northeastern and northwestern parts of Syria, controlled by separatist militias and terrorist organizations. This decision represents direct support by the U.S. administration to these illegal entities and a flagrant violation of the sovereignty of the Syrian Arab Republic, its independence, and its unity of people and territory. It is a grave breach of the relevant Security Council resolutions. It is an effort to impose an illegitimate situation and a discriminatory approach against Syrian citizens, one that is based on supporting those who are loyal to it and subject to its influence, while punishing the residents of the areas under the control of the Syrian state. On the other hand, we witnessed this month the holding of a replica of the so-called Brussels Conference to support the future of Syria and the region. Holding this conference in light of the continued exclusion of the Syrian government from its work by the organizers and barring Russia's participation, and in light of its loss of UN sponsorship, means that this conference has become a gathering of Western countries known for their politicization of humanitarian issues and their deviation from the internationally agreed upon guiding principles for humanitarian action. These conferences are nothing but a smokescreen, one that is launched by their organizers to cover up their practices against my country. All this at a time when they impose collective punishment and a stifling, inhumane blockade on the Syrian people, depriving every Syrian of access to their basic living needs. Moreover, they continue to insist on linking humanitarian and development work with politicized conditions that hinder the implementation of projects for resilience and early recovery and the rehabilitation of damaged infrastructure, which would allow for the dignified, voluntary, and safe return of refugees and displaced persons. Madam President, those aggressive policies against my country were accompanied by direct military aggression carried out by the Israeli occupation forces on Syrian territory, the latest of which was the firing of missiles at some parts of the central region on the evening of Friday, the 13th of May, 2022. This aggression resulted in the martyrdom of 5 persons, including 1 civilian. It wounded 7 citizens, including a child. This aggression caused heavy material losses and caused several fires to break out in the forests of the Masyaf countryside. This Israeli aggression coincided with a terrorist attack launched by terrorist groupings in northwestern Syria against units of the Syrian Arab Army. This led to the martyrdom of 10 soldiers and the wounding of others. This confirms once again the continuous coordination between the Israeli occupation authorities and their terrorist tools. The government of the Syrian Arab Republic has informed the Secretary General of the United Nations and the members of the Security Council of these attacks and demanded that they assume their responsibilities to put an end to the repeated Israeli attacks that seriously threaten regional and international peace and security. Madam President, my country facilitated the passage of a 4th UN convoy from Aleppo to northwestern Syria this week. This convoy included 14 trucks laden with humanitarian aid, and we are looking forward to enhancing cross-line aid delivery and removing the obstacles imposed by the Turkish regime and its terrorist organizations. Syria reiterates its position regarding the so-called cross-border aid mechanism in view of the continuous violation of Syria's sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity it constitutes, and despite the grave and in view of the grave defects it has and which some constantly try to cover up. Before I close, Madam President, I'd like to note to the statements by the Turkish regime on creating a safe zone inside our country. We confirm that such attempts are considered a project that is anti-Syria. It is considered an attempt to implement a colonial plan and plot that aims to divide, and it would help terrorist organizations to implement their terrorist plans against the Syrian people. The government of the Syrian Arab Republic condemns such statements and such plans that undermine the unity and territorial integrity of Syria. We demand the international organization not to bargain with the Erdogan regime over the lands of others and not to support such projects that are based on genocide and changing the demographic construction and harming the rights of the Syrian people, which would have catastrophic repercussions on security, stability, and peace in the region and the world. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic